Good afternoon. Today is Monday, the 8th of July, 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, and myself, Brian Gerrish. We're delighted to be joined by Mark Anderson and Diane Rasmussen, McAdie from Scotland. It's grey and raining here in Plymouth. I don't know whether that's connected with the election result, possibly.
What, depressing, you mean?
Depressing, grey, cold, wet.
Right. Well, let's talk about that for a second and see how depressed we get. So here is Keir Starmer. This was him when he was giving his opening speech before the weekend. And as no change there, because we've got the double cross behind him, as usual. So just as long as we understand what the situation is. On Saturday morning, then, he held a cabinet meeting. And this apparently is practically a unique thing because cabinet meetings never get held on Saturday mornings. The last time, I think, was for the Falklands War. But anyway, I thought we would...
They're happy, Mike.
Well, yes, aren't they? Yeah. Well, the double cross there as well, as you'll see, specially set up for this particular cabinet meeting. But I thought we would just listen to a few seconds of his opening sort of address to the nation.
Afternoon, and thank you very much for coming. Yesterday, the work of change began. We're a Change Labour Party, and yesterday we started the work of changing the country. And as the dust settles on Thursday's result, what is becoming clear for, I think, all to see is the mood of the nation, of the country, what is expected of us, and the mandate that we have to deliver change. It's a mandate not just to govern, although it is certainly that, but it's a mandate that has put trust in us to change the country and to deliver. And it's a mandate to do politics differently. And that change started yesterday as well.
So I don't know how many times you used the word change in the first 45 seconds there, but plenty of times. So let's have a look and see how much is actually changing here. So if we bring David Lammy on screen, he's the new Foreign Secretary. This government will reconnect Britain to build a better future, he said on Twitter. Great to have my first calls today with, and I wonder who the first person he was speaking to was. Well, it's Dimitri Kuleba, of course, and I believe that Starmer's first call, aside from Biden, if you could have a conversation with Biden these days, was to Zelensky. So it's pretty clear what's going on there. So that's foreign policy sorted out. So let's have a look at defence then. And here is our new Defence Secretary, John Healey. He was giving an address on Friday afternoon to the Armed Forces personnel and MOD civilian staff, which is very exciting for them, I'm sure. There he is with Radican, our Chief of the Defence Staff, looking good together. But the question is there going to be any change in defence policy? Well, this is a statement that John Healey made to the House of Commons just before the election.
Mr Deputy Speaker, the Shadow Foreign Secretary and I had one simple message on our visit, and that is the UK continues to be united for Ukraine. If there is a change of government after the election this year, there will be no change in Britain's resolve to stand with Ukraine, confront Russian aggression and to pursue Putin for his war crimes. And we told the Defence Minister, the Foreign Minister, the Chief of Staff to President Zelensky, the parliamentarians we met, this is our Labour guarantee to Ukraine. And that's why we've fully backed the government's increased military aid to Ukraine this year and for the years ahead.
So no change there. And that was a speech that he made in Parliament, having just visited Ukraine just before the election. And as soon as he's elected and made Defence Secretary, he's back to Ukraine to go and meet Zelensky and so on. So no change there. Then we've got, of course, the wonderful Yvette Cooper as our Home Secretary. I wonder what she was talking about on Twitter. Let's have a look. Well, 7/7 attacks anniversary was yesterday. So, we'll talk a little bit about that in extra. And she's also talking about border security. So they're going to ramp up border security. What this is all about is keeping everybody focused on illegal or irregular migration as opposed to regular migration, you know, because the smaller number is the one you've got to focus on, right?
And ID cards.
Absolutely. Then we've got our new Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves. She's been appointed. Now, what's her history? Well, as soon as she left university, she headed off to join the Bank of England, as you do. And then after that, she went to work for HBOS. She was a proponent of quantitative easing in 2009, but her big gambit is what she's calling securonomics. Does that make you feel secure?
No.
Well, securonomics is heavily inspired by Joe Biden's economic policy, particularly his Inflation Reduction Act. That should make us all feel very good. But they have guaranteed £28 billion a year for climate investment. So climate change policy is going to stay. But in the meantime, if she's Bank of England and so on, open democracy, highlighting, this is back in September last year, how big business took over the Labour Party. This is the changed Labour Party, of course, at least from Corbyn days back to the Blair days, I would suggest. And they reported that Reeves, alongside Peter Kyle, Wes Streeting and Yvette Cooper, received large private donations from wealthy financiers. But they do go on to say that there's no suggestion of impropriety, so you don't need to worry. No suggestion. They think that these wealthy financiers genuinely believe in policies that are good for their banker backers. Then, of course, we've got the whole Israel issue. Is there going to be any change there? Well, no, because in fact, if we go back to 2011, like Ed, we should all be friends of Israel. And making the point here that Rachel Reeves and a bunch of others, friends of Labour friends of Israel. In fact, if we go to the electronic intifada, they're pointing out that Labour friends of Israel hid the list of supporters just prior to the election because they didn't want this to be an election issue. But what they're saying here is that no less than 17 of Starmer's 31 shadow cabinet members, now cabinet members, the Labour MPs most likely to form the next government if their party wins the election, which they did, are on the most recent LFI supporters list. These include Starmer himself, as well as Rachel Reeves, Yvette Cooper and David Lammy, all three potential candidates for the so-called great offices of state, finance, home and foreign affairs, respectively. So Starmer may be planning lots of change for the country, but in the key areas of war and support for Israel, there'll be no change.
And support from Ukraine as well.
Yes.
Well, let's have a little look or remind ourselves at the power behind the throne. And what better place to go than the Tony Blair Institute and a vision for the future. So this was a little while ago.
I think we're going here. All right. You good? Which one are you? Am I here? Fantastic.
Well, this is a first. So, thank you very much indeed for coming. I'm really, really grateful. Thank you so much for the speech. Before we get on to the substance, how are you enjoying Prime Minister's questions?
I'm a bit out of practice.
But he's not turning up.
I haven't seen him for 3 weeks. We got one tomorrow, and then I think only 2 more before conference. So, I think he's more than anyone else.
Yeah, that's something I really don't miss, you know.
Yeah.
Even now, wherever I am in the world, sort of midday Wednesday, I think I've got this uneasy feeling. Yeah, that's what it was.
But I think at least you moved it from twice a week into once a week.
Yep.
So that's only on a Wednesday at 12.
It's a small number of people who should be grateful to me, but they should be very grateful.
I keep reminding the Shadow Cabinet that back in the day, the Prime Minister used to sit on the front bench and choose which of his ministers would answer the question. Yes. So we could go back to that model.
Yeah, we never know what they're going to say, though. That's the thing.
So when I watched that clip, the two comedians were absolutely mocking Parliament, mocking their fellow MPs. And of course, Tony Blair very frightened of Prime Minister's questions because, of course, people were asking him why he went to war on a pack of lies. But aside from that, they don't value their MPs, so they're not credible and they can't speak and answer a question for the Prime Minister. So just mocking the whole institution in Westminster. Let's have a look at the second clip.
We have to get the mood of the country right because we have to speak to the country where it is now and not where we'd like it to be. And therefore it's a mistake to us to speak to the country as if it's 1996. We've got to speak to the country as it is in 2023.
Right, and they want a sense of realism.
Yeah. Reassurance. They want hope, of course, but the reassurance has to come first. Do you get it? Do you know how bad things are? Do you know how much I'm struggling? Can you fix the immediate problem? And can you deal with the longer term fundamentals that we need to fix?
I'm personally a fan of the 5 missions.
So there we are. He said he's going to judge the mood of the country. No, he's come straight in and told the country that he's going to change the country in all aspects. This man, in my opinion, is an extremely dangerous change agent. And of course, he's got Blair as his mentor in the background. So anything is possible. But let's have a look at a little bit more that's coming to the fore in the press at the moment. So this is iNews, why Keir Starmer and the King are the new power duo. King Charles and his new Labour Prime Minister have common causes. That's an interesting expression. Common causes close to their hearts. Is this the start of a strong coalition? Well, if we get into a little bit of the detail on this, basically they pick up that Sir Keir has been talking to Clive Alderton, the Principal Private Secretary to King Charles, and widely seen as part of a growing body of evidence that the monarch and the latest occupant of number 10 enjoy an unusually close relationship. So that will be of great interest. And if you haven't seen the Green King series on the UK column, have a look at it. Starmer has made clear Labour wants a green reindustrialisation policy, and that dovetails with that which the King has been saying. That's not my typo, since the late 1960s. So there does appear to be a meeting of minds on this. Now, what was interesting with this article is that it was based on this organisation, an interview with Limud, which I'd never heard of. And surprisingly, for a lot of the information, I have to go in the direction of Israel and the media in Israel. So this is the Times of Israel. UK Labour leader Starmer opens up about his family's Jewish traditions. Starmer claims that he did go to the Church of England when he was younger, but he now attends a synagogue. So I believe that he's Jewish, but I'm not sure. His wife is. But if we have a look at Limud and see what that's about, we strive to create individual, collective and communal experiences through which we develop and strengthen our Jewish identity. So this is simply about the Jewish community. And what it is the setting up of little cells of volunteers who help spread the Jewish message through their own and other communities. This is one gentleman here that I just happened to notice that he's currently president of Brennabrith, Cheshire. And this is of interest because that is another extremely powerful lobbying group. And they have been getting very unhappy that people are criticising Zionism, because you mustn't criticise Zionism in any form, because that apparently makes you anti-Semitic. And this is the statement here of the president of the organisation. If you don't know what it's about, I'm going to encourage you to have a look, do your own research, and you'll understand why that's a significant comment in a minute. But it's it's not a religious organisation, but one that exists to unite all Jews for the common good. And it's from the Children of the Covenant. It was formed in New York in 1843 by 12 German Jewish immigrants, but now it operates in 59 countries and has official status at the UN as an NGO and represented at the EU in Brussels. So immensely powerful. And what can it do? Well, it can send pretty strong letters to Keir Starmer himself in order to tell him how to deal with anybody they deem is anti-Semitic within Parliament. So this is huge pressure and being put onto the Prime Minister himself. Now, this is another organisation, the Anti-Defamation League, exposing the inherent anti-Semitism. Sorry, there's a couple of quotes from their website to just show what they're up to. So in his book, he's talking about an Israel lobby. They say it doesn't exist, but everything we're showing today demonstrates, in my mind at least, that it does exist. And so the ADL also educates Americans on the security challenges confronting Israel. So this is all about lobbying, and it goes on. They're talking about Iran and stopping nuclear Iran. And they're also here to address anti-Semitic and anti-Israel intimidations and schools. And of course, this is not just being done in the US, it's happening across the world. Let's look at this, though. They operate a database, and I spent some time having a look at it. If you are talking about any of these subjects, according to the ADL, then you are part of the hate and extremist agenda. So don't talk about the World Economic Forum. That makes you an extremist. Even to use your expression, do your own research, is apparently proof that you're connected with QAnon and extremists. It goes on here. Let's bring some more in. So people are identified: Gilad Atzmon, David Icke, American Free Press, London Forum, even the whole of Telegram, and anyone who mentions USS Liberty. So Mark, just very quickly, what's your response to American Free Press being identified as hate speech?
I guess I stand guilty because I just did a report on USS Liberty, and American Free Press had that as a long-time tradition. Guilty as charged in the ironic sense. It's absolutely ridiculous, and I'll go into it more if you'd like during Extra.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Well, certainly a lot to talk about, but let's have a look at this. If you dare to talk about these subjects, you're an extremist, according to the ADL. Turbo cancer, plandemic, scamdemic, or even mentioning that somebody died suddenly. And why should we really pay attention to this? Well, because ADL set up a conference, Never Is Now. This is the 2024 agenda. And if you go and have a look at speakers, well, surprise, surprise, we've got Dr. Albert Bourla, from Chief Executive from Pfizer, as well as Hillary Clinton. So don't talk about these subjects. Otherwise, you identify yourself as an extremist in the eyes of the Anti-Defamation League. It seems to me, Mike, that a small number of people are gaining great power by being able to bully and lobby the UK government to follow their policies and not the policies of the electorate. But we'll discuss that more in due course.
Yes, so let's welcome Diane to the programme. Diane, what's the situation in Scotland with respect to the election then?
Yeah, thanks, Mike and Brian and Mark. I'm happy to be here today. So in Scotland, an interesting thing happened, which I think maybe has become a little bit ignored or maybe not noticed in the overall results of the election, which is that the SNP has basically been thrown out. 36 SNP seats have been changed to Labour, which you can see there in a couple of graphics that we've got displayed. You can see it was quite a significant difference. SNP is basically out. There's now 39 seats of SNP. And an interesting comment that I heard from someone else on Friday when we were discussing election results is that the failures of the Scottish government can no longer blame Westminster for the failures because it's all gone to Labour now. So I thought I would as well look a little bit around education as kind of the educator here at the UK column team, and look a little bit at what Labour has said they would do, which actually is not that much. It was certainly not a priority in the manifesto, but I think I will look at this as well as the new education secretary. So you see a couple of the top priorities here, according to the manifesto. One at the bottom is that they are going to recruit 6,500 more teachers, which they plan to do by basically putting VAT back onto private schools, and that they're going to introduce free breakfast schools at every primary school in England. Still not entirely clear how they're going to fund that. We also see some other issues with education that they talked about: qualification levels, reforming Ofsted, improving maths in nursery and primary schools, reviewing the curriculum to make it broader and give more children more opportunities, and turn further education colleges into what they call technical excellence colleges and improve apprenticeships. And that's actually something that I want to look into some more because I don't know at this point what that is. So, of course, who's going to lead all this? Well, it was the shadow education secretary, now the education secretary, Bridget Phillipson. So I thought it was worth looking at her a little bit and who she is and what she stands for. She is an MP for the city of Sunderland. She's relatively young. I think she's 40 years old. She read history at Oxford, and she's been in office since 2010. first as an opposition whip and has been on various committees. So if we look at what else she's been doing during this time so far, going back to Israel again, we see that there were some issues with her potentially having an advisor visiting Israel as part of this organization called ELNET, which is the European Leadership Network, which is supposedly nonpartisan. But what we see is that Keir Starmer has potentially been involved in this. Gareth Thomas, Wes Streeting, the new Shadow Health Secretary, which was somebody mentioned Debbie mentioned on Friday around the health issues related to Wes Streeting, that they have all potentially had connections with this organization where they got introduced to the Iron Dome, they got introduced to an IDF briefing, and there were Israel politicians that told these delegations, for example, quote, and this was from the article that was just showed, which will be in the show notes, "What the Arabs need to understand is that we're here now and they need to get over it." And so there's questions around, are they really nonpartisan, and why were they there, and what is the funding going on? There's apparently very rich people behind American millionaires and billionaires sort of helping to fund this Israeli organization and so on. So that needs some more investigation. In terms of her globalist perspective, I thought I would look into that a bit. So Bridget and climate, she signed up to the UN Climate Change Pledge several years ago. So again, just going along with the climate issue, the UN sustainable goals and so on. Also the Great British Energy, which is another part of the Labour manifesto. She is strongly in support of that. Again, I don't know how that's going to work. Again, we need some more investigation into how all this clean power is actually going to power the nation. Bridget and women. This is something as a woman, of course, that I want to focus on. So she said that she has in the past supported the UN Women Agency, which I think historically at least was set up supposedly to support women and girls and equality and access to education and so on, which of course I completely support. But the question is, what is UN Women really doing? So one of the things that they did during Pride Month, which thankfully is over now in July, in June, they posted about LGBTIQ plus people on the move. So regardless of your sexual preferences or anything else, I don't see what this has to do specifically with women, but this was about migrants and LGBTIQ plus people and what that meant for the migrants. So I'm not sure how that relates to women. And I have a video clip here. Please bear with us. It's both funny and painful at the same time. When we had Bridget interviewed about trans women and toilets, if we could play that clip, please, Brian, Mike.
The trans woman with a penis would use which lavatory?
Well, look, I think it's important that all people feel safe and have dignity.
No, but she needs to go to the lavatory. Which one does she use?
I think there are a range of options that would.
Well, she hasn't got a range of options, respectfully. She's got a door with a woman on it. She's got a door with a bloke on it. Which one does she go in, Bridget Phillipson?
Well, many businesses and many public buildings also provide the option.
Yes, sadly, this restaurant only has one with a picture of a woman and a picture of a man. So which door does she go through?
Well, I would expect they would have a range of different options.
No, this restaurant doesn't. It's just got the two. So which one does she use?
I would want people to treat one another with respect.
She needs to use the lavatory, Shadow Secretary of State. Which one is she to use?
I would hope that person, whoever they would happen to be, trans person, it's not clear, would.
Well, it is. It's a trans woman with a penis, and she's desperate to go to the loo, and she's really getting desperate now.
I wouldn't want that person to feel at risk. Equally, I wouldn't want biological women to feel intimidated.
So where does she go?
Space. It's about seeking common sense solutions and being practical about it. I would hope that they might be able to, for example, try and find a compromise where no one.
So she's got to leave the restaurant to find somewhere else, is what we're saying.
No, I would expect that a business would provide a range of different options so that all people, biological women and trans women, can find a way so that no one feels that their safety or dignity is compromised. And I do think where it comes to trans people within our society, I understand the challenges that the long process that many people will have gone through in order to be recognised in a gender different to the biological sex into which they were born. That is not a short process, that is an extensive.
But you seem to have checked earlier this week. You said she should use the female toilet, didn't you?
So welcome to our new education secretary. I don't know if you gentlemen have any comments on that.
Well, we were commenting on it while the video was playing, saying, would you allow a woman like this to run education? And my answer would be no, because she's devious, disingenuous. She doesn't want to answer the question. And that's because the policy agenda is more powerful than common sense. So I wouldn't want this woman near any child of any age.
Indeed. Okay, let's move on. If you like what the UK column does, you would like to support us, we do need your support, and you can do that by heading over to support.ukcolumn.org. The options are there. A membership is only £5 a month.
And I would just add a huge thank you to people who also donate to the UK column. It's really fantastic. And we've had some really lovely emails recently. So thank you very much for that.
But if you don't want to do that, we certainly do need you to share the material. The algorithms, of course, keep us blacklisted. So we need people to act as the algorithm, particularly on Facebook, where we are currently banned as another platform that we're banned from. You could pick something up at the UK column shop, but please, well, Brian, I don't know if you've got any more to say about Your Life in Their Hands.
Well, I did ask originally if every UK column member would buy one of these, because it's a really excellent publication. A lot of work went into it originally. It's been updated, and it's a very powerful, concise summary of what's been going on around Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. So if you haven't bought one and you are a UK column member, please buy one. It would help everybody and be very much appreciated.
Absolutely. Now, tonight at 7 p.m, we're going to premiere an interview that I recorded with Vanessa Beeley and David Miller on Friday afternoon, I think it was. Well, this is all about the Zionist movement in Britain. And David has done a lot of research since he won his case against Bristol University. In fact, that case has driven a lot of the research that he's done in the last several months. So do join us for that if you possibly can. 7 o'clock tonight in the usual places, ukcolumn.org/live, or on the community website if you're a member. Tomorrow at 1 p.m, we'll be streaming out Cheryl Granger taking on the MHRA and how they enable harm, shall we say. So do join Cheryl for that 1 p.m. tomorrow. And another reminder of a date for your diary.
Indeed, Saturday the 19th of October this year, a venue to be announced in Bristol where you have the opportunity to come and meet the UK column team really live, as Mike has said on this slide, and a number of other really interesting speakers. Details of that will come out, but we'd encourage you to get that date booked in your diary. Many of you have been asking for a very long time if UK column would start to come out and about, and we think this will be a really fantastic event. Now, how can I get you smiling? Well, this made me smile first thing this morning. It's a little video telling the truth about NATO. It plays out. I had to play it out with the music, but I'll tell viewers who are listening what it had to say in just a moment. So there we are, little video. It's basically saying it's a myth that NATO is at war with Russia, because NATO is a defensive organization and it only works with its members to keep everyone safe. But of course, the reality is it's pumping in arms and weapons to fight Russia in a proxy war. Yes, that is a real war where over 500,000 men have been slaughtered. And the arms are still going in. And of course, our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is very pleased that his Labour Party is going to pump in more arms. So Ukraine, not a member of NATO. We'll have a little bit more about that later in the news. But that proxy war being fought via the Ukrainians. So a little bit of fantasy, which I enjoyed with my morning cup of tea. Just crass. Mark, let's bring you on because you're going to take us through a bit more detail on the 2024 NATO summit.
Yes, indeed, gentlemen, and Diane, it starts this week. Oh boy, the 2024 NATO summit marking 75 years of the alliance. 75 years ago, just 12 countries signed that North Atlantic Treaty in Washington to ensure their collective defense in an unpredictable world. Now it's 32 allies meeting again in Washington. So that's the meaning of doing this in DC again. And we'll move on from there and kind of paint a general preview and overview of NATO. Not a lot of depth, but mostly breadth. But we'll look at a couple of the sins of NATO, you might say, along the way, which don't exactly speak to it being a purely defensive organization. Who NATO has a state, where DC is going to be 9 through 11 July, so that starts tomorrow. And they're going to address the challenges facing the alliance and further strengthens NATO deterrence and defense. That's what they say are the main goals. And we'll keep going from there. Here's Jens Stoltenberg, of course, a Bilderberg perennial. At the Washington Summit, he says, we will demonstrate NATO's unity and strength once again in support of Ukraine and to keep all our people and values safe. One wonders about values in this context. Going on, collective defense and Article 5, and this gets into the basic principle of collective defense and says it's at the very heart of NATO's founding treaty. This is from NATO itself. It remains a unique and enduring principle that binds its members together, committing them to protect each other and setting a spirit of solidarity within the alliance. And we'll keep going. And that is basically the same thing. Here it gets into a little more details. Collective defense means that an attack against one ally is considered an attack against all allies within the NATO alliance. The principle of collective defense is enshrined in Article 5 in that North Atlantic Treaty. NATO invoked Article 5 for the first and only time in its history after the 9/11 terrorist attacks against the U.S. NATO took part in operations in Afghanistan, which did result in atrocities against civilians there that made quite a few headlines at the time. NATO has taken collective defense measures on several occasions, including in response to the situation in Syria and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, of course, and it has standing forces on active duty that contribute to the alliance's collective defense efforts permanently. And we'll continue to go. The North Atlantic Treaty itself, here it is. I'll just get into the highlights just a little. The parties to this treaty reaffirmed their faith in the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations and their desire to live in peace with all peoples and all governments. Now, what's interesting there is a lot of people forget that NATO is a direct offshoot of the UN. The UN Charter provided a regional arrangements mechanism, and out of that sprung NATO. And in Article 1 itself, it says the parties undertake as set forth in the UN Charter to settle any international dispute in which they may be involved by peaceful means in such a manner that international peace and security and justice are not endangered, and to refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force in any matter inconsistent with the purposes of the UN. That's a qualification that is important. We'll get into that maybe an extra. But oops, along came NATO's Operation Unified Protector, which in its core existence ran from the 31st of March to the 31st of October back in 2011. This is Amnesty International's take on it, Libya, the forgotten victims of NATO strikes. The stated purpose of NATO's military operation in Libya, which were carried out at the request of and with the full support of a transition committee, was to protect the civilian population from grave human rights violations which were being perpetrated by the former Libyan regime, Gaddafi, with impunity. But that's not really the case. I won't get into all of this, but before it became the official Operation Unified Protector, on the 23rd of March, in 2011, Allied forces announced they were in control of Libyan airspace after they disabled Libya's air force. And it goes on to say that according to NATO, the 7-month air and sea military campaign in Libya comprised more than 9,700 strike sorties and destroyed over 5,900 military targets. A very massive bombing campaign. There were airstrikes on homes that were documented, not only by Amnesty International guys, but by other organizations. Dozens of civilians had been killed in NATO airstrikes on private homes in residential and rural areas, where Amnesty International, UN experts, that's ironic since they fight under the UN aegis, other NGOs and journalists found no evidence, get that, they found no evidence of military objectives at the strike locations at the time of the strikes in these residential areas. So NATO's not exactly looking purely defensive here, to say the least. Now, the Great Man-Made River Project, some of us may recall, and you can see the picture I inset there, a massive water transport system. You can see how small that man is compared to the pipeline. And the Great Man-Made River Project, Gaddafi created to transport enormous amounts of water to Libya, because Libya was, and I think still is, considered one of the most arid places on earth, or at least among the most arid. And according to the United Nations Children's Fund, 4 million of Libya's estimated population of 6.5 million faced serious water shortages in the wake of NATO having largely destroyed, or at least significantly damaged, this major water transport system, which many people saw as a really dirty pool and even possibly a war crime. And according to the Washington Report on Middle East Affairs, which is where this came from, 11 years after Gaddafi's assassination, his main legacies, including the Great Man-Made River Project, are suffering the many consequences of NATO-supported rebellion that ended his rule. And the entire project's infrastructure is under threat, et cetera, et cetera. And what NATO did is it supported a faction there that was said to be a rebellion against Gaddafi's rule. So NATO allied itself with those that were seeking to overthrow Gaddafi. This is what we're told. According to the ecologist.org, NATO deliberately destroyed Libya's water infrastructure, and that publication called it a war crime, noting the military targeting of civilian infrastructure, especially of water supplies, is a war crime under the Geneva Conventions. That's what this outlet alleged. And we'll keep going from there and start to summarize this a bit. Some of the other sins of NATO this year, guys, is the 25th anniversary of the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia. So we're leaving Libya now. We're getting into Yugoslavia as well as Serbia. And as I noted here, this is my own writing. NATO bombs Bosnia from August 30th to September 20th of 1995. That happened. And then in another case, NATO bombed Serbia/Yugoslavia for 78 days from the 24th of March to the 10th of June in 1999. So that's 1995 Bosnia and 1999 Yugoslavia. In Bosnia, NATO, via Operation Deliberate Force, used 400 aircraft and 5,000 personnel from 15 nations. 1,026 bombs were dropped on 338 targets, and in Yugoslavia, in that other instance, Serbia was then part of Yugoslavia. NATO bombs killed roughly 2,000 civilians. NATO bombs killed roughly 2,000 civilians, and material damages were between 30 and 50 billion. And in that latter case, the 78-day bombing campaign, reportedly there were TV stations completely destroyed, schools were damaged and hit, and many other civilian targets were completely or partially destroyed. So again, you look at NATO's history, especially its recent history, and you wonder about this cool, collective, purely defensive posture that it tries to sell everyone. At any rate, I did sign up as a UK column reporter for the NATO Public Forum. That's going to take place a little bit later this week, the 10th and 11th of July. And I understand that we're encouraging UK column viewers and members to also sign up. It's very easy, so we can have a little bit more of a presence at that event. Apparently, you can raise your hand digitally or virtually, that is, to ask questions, much like when I cover a WHO press conference. Hopefully, it'll be that user-friendly. Briefly, it describes it here. The NATO Public Forum is a public event jointly organized by NATO and the host government with civil society organizations also involved, taking place during the summit meetings of NATO's heads of state and government. And I won't get into all the details there. It's fairly self-explanatory. And we can look a little bit at the sponsors. And It includes Google, Microsoft, Atlantic Council. And so there's a lot of Bilderberg connections through those organizations and others, even Saab Motors, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, of course, not real unexpected there. The German Marshall Fund. If you look through it, our friends at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, the former Chicago CFR, the McCain Institute, named after the warmonger John McCain, the former Arizona senator, the late senator there, and the Clinton Presidential Library is even among the sponsors and co-sponsors. So lots of names there and organizations that viewers can peruse if they want to freeze those slides. But that's basically it, gentlemen, and I'll be covering it this week, not only the public forum, but other matters as best I can to glean more from what they're having to say. So back to you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Well, if NATO's heavy into war, let's just come back to Ukraine for a moment. And I was just intrigued to see this with the Ukraine news agency. This was Zelensky essentially crowing that Keir Starmer had been on the phone to him. But this is in relation to a 100-year agreement between Ukraine and the UK. 100-year. We can't sort out the potholes in the road in UK, but apparently we can plan for 100 years when it comes to Ukraine. Now, what interested me about a 100-year agreement with UK and Ukraine was I'd previously just seen this headline, and I thought it was an interesting contrast. Ukraine to be told it is too corrupt to join NATO. So apparently Ukraine is not corrupt enough for Keir Starmer to want to halt a 100-year agreement. And there's something very wrong. This should result in questions being asked in Parliament. And I'm going to encourage our audience to get writing, get emailing, challenge those new Labour MPs to ask what on earth they're doing with UK taxpayers' money. But this is what Zelensky had to say. He said that he'd had a phone conversation with Keir Starmer on Friday, the day Starmer was appointed as the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Joe Biden was first, Zelensky was second for the phone call, and Netanyahu third. Zelensky went on to say that during the call they discussed the UK's support and the preparation of a, quote, unprecedented 100-year partnership agreement between the two countries. This is incredible, Mike, when you think about it. Utterly incredible. He said he congratulated Sir Keir Starmer on his election victory and wished him success in fulfilling the British people's expectations of the new government. I'm grateful to Prime Minister Starmer for reaffirming the UK's principled and unwavering support for Ukraine. That unwavering means that Ukraine can do as it pleases. He also said that we coordinated positions ahead of the NATO summit in Washington and other international events, as well as discuss ways to strengthen our partnership, including the preparation of an unprecedented 100-year partnership agreement between the Ukraine and the UK. Now, if that is not bad enough, I was just tweaked, I think is the word, to have a little look back at the Anti-Defamation League, because they'd been talking about the sorts of symbology used in Ukraine and the Nazi symbols, the swastika and the rune symbology used by the Ukrainian armed forces. But surprisingly, although they commented on Ukraine, there was absolutely no criticism of right-wing extremism, the Nazis or Nazi symbolism in Ukraine. And I was very puzzled about this. Why is it that Ukraine is allowed to be extremist and brutally violent in this way? And that is not going to cause comment by ADL. But anybody else, including people who are talking about the Great Reset, are branded as extremists, right-wing extremists. I'll leave our audience to answer that. But let's just come back to the database of extremism and hate that I mentioned earlier, because here is some of the things that the ADL is very excited about, and you can see why I've made the comment I just have, because they particularly relate to symbologies being used by, for example, the Azov battalion in Ukraine, but they also talk about the Celtic cross, and they also talk about the biblical phrase, the synagogue of Satan. So rather disturbing here that the ADL is clearly attacking Christians and trying to brand them as being right-wing extremists due to historical artifacts such as the Celtic cross, for example. But apparently even the Bible is something we shouldn't read. They even given a reference to Revelation 2.29 and 3:9 in the Bible. And this is where the term synagogue of Satan is used. But of course, if you go and have a look at that, the warning is about people who call themselves Jewish and are not. So I don't know what the problem with ADL is if the biblical statement is about fraudulent Jewish people. And what have we got here? Well, even if you're Jewish, you're going to be attacked, because ADL being particularly unpleasant with the Jewish Voice for Peace, which is a Jewish group standing up for peace in Gaza and elsewhere in the world. So a lot of questions to be answered about these powerful lobbying groups and their extreme power now within the UK cabinet and around our Prime Minister Keir Starmer. And I'm going to say that UK Column is not frightened to ask these questions. They're questions that need to be asked and answers obtained.
Diane, let's come back to you then. And at the Sounds Beautiful Festival, my presentation there, I was talking about the latest effort to reinstate variants of COVID, but you've got an update for us.
I do. Yeah, thanks, Mike. Unfortunately. So yeah, we've got some more new variants coming out, and I've been seeing a lot on Twitter recently around new variants and the people who are still very, very worried about COVID. Oh, yeah, thanks. We have a fourth guy. Hello there, new guy. We're talking about the fluke variant today. And what I did last week was I put out a quick poll on my Twitter. So if you don't follow me on Twitter, it's actually DIANE UKC. And I asked people if you have not had any COVID jabs, assuming that a large portion of our audience would not be having jabs, how many times have you, quote unquote, had COVID? And I put that in inverted commas for a reason. So we've got 68% said never, 27% said once, 5.5% said twice or more. It could be skewed, of course, or maybe the results are slightly different because of people who have been jabbed and are just, answering the question anyway. But however, that's still pretty significant to see that. And we're going to talk about Australia because we'll see why. So first, let's play this clip from the NHS England board meeting from exactly 2 years ago on the 7th of July, 2022.
Once we get through this wave, we will have to see how we fare in August and September. But we are expecting as we go into the winter, and of course there could be new variants that come along before, but we are expecting as we get into the winter months that we will see increasing pressure through COVID again. And as Amanda said earlier, we're also expecting to see flu this year. We haven't seen significant incidents of flu in the last 2 winters. We're keeping a very close eye on Australia, where there's been a perhaps more severe than usual and perhaps more earlier than usual flu season in the Southern Hemisphere. And so that can be a signal for the Northern Hemisphere, but I think irrespective of that, we would be very concerned about flu coming back this winter. And so we are taking that into account in our planning for winter, as we will hear in a minute.
So let's talk about why this is important. So Australia, of course, it's their winter now. It's our summer here. We'll be here in a few months. And we're already seeing reports from Australia with hospitals being overwhelmed through COVID and flu, if they want to differentiate still, obviously. But we have staff shortages. We have hospitals being overwhelmed. They're out of hospital beds. We have a lot going on. Surgeries are being paused, elective surgeries, because they can't cope with the number of people who are coming in who are really unwell and going to A&E. So getting into this new variant, as I said, we're no longer flirting with flirt. We are now losing our flirting to fluke, F-L-U-Q-E. And I'm not making it up, but they're saying that fluke is contributing to a sicker than normal winter season in Australia. So you can see the article there from the Daily Mail. This is covered in many sources in Australia. And we'll see a video next from one of those mainstream media sources about fluke from Australia.
COVID. Yeah, that thing. We don't want to think about it, but it's still out there making people sick. And now we've got a new subvariant to brace for. The fluke subvariant has been ripping through the US and is also making its presence felt in Australia. Fluke mutated from the flirt variant that hit Australia at the end of last year, and both are descendants of Omicron. So is there anything unique or especially worrisome about fluke? Not really. Scientists say it's better at dodging our immune system and is more transmissible, but the severity of symptoms is about the same as past variants. And while current COVID vaccines will offer some protection from fluke, there should be a better one available in Australia at the end of the year.
So that's fluke. Welcome to fluke. Goodbye flirting. So if we look at our Olden data, which is, again, I've referred to this in the past around vaccinations and so on, we see that the curve has gone straight up from vaccinated people in Australia. As we know, they were one of the heaviest vaccinated countries, just like the UK. So we have just over 80% who have had at least one dose by the end of 2022. And then we'll look at excess deaths in Australia. From 2020 to 2023, it was actually below normal. In 2020, were like no excess deaths. And then we go up into December 2023, and we see again, just like the vaccination rate, the number of excess deaths has gone straight up by cumulative number of deaths. So what does this mean for the UK? As I said, and as they said in the NHS board meeting, whatever happens in the Southern Hemisphere eventually comes up here when it comes to be our winter time. And now they're blaming Euro 2024 is creating more infections. It was, the flirt. So the KP3 is the scientific term for fluke, but the flirt and the other variants fall under KP1 and KP2 and so on. And that's what UK HSA is currently blaming on the number of so-called infections that are here. So what exactly is going on? So I decided to I started to think about why are we coming up with these names? We had flirt, we had fluke, we have Omicron, we have all these crazy names. And so I went deeply into this, and not to explain this diagram at all, but we can see here that it was originally sluke, and now it's fluke, and flirt is off into the corner. And there's also deflirt. I guess that's what you do when you don't want to flirt with a virus. I don't know. But we have all these names and all of these sort of biochemists and epidemiologists, so-called experts that are looking at how all these variants match up with one another. So we won't go into those details, but just to show you that they have a basis. We have the WHO Coronavirus Network, which has a very cute name, CoviNet. I like that. CoviNet sounds very cute. They were talking about in 2024, they met in March of 2024 in Geneva to discuss what they were going to do. And their core objectives can be listed there. It goes into the One Health approach, which is about monitoring. We're doing all these monitoring of, what's happening in the One Health approach from the WHO and the UN is, of course, linked to how the entire world is linked to each other. So we now are seeing possibilities of infections spreading from humans to animals. So it's called reverse zoonosis. We see lots of things going on here. And you can go and get these detailed epidemiological updates from COVID from the last few years. This is the most recent one from the 17th of June with the COVID vaccination insights and so on. And so we see here the variants coming up and different things happening. So if you want to really get into the depth of what's going on, and the thing that really scares me about this is what's called genomic surveillance. And they're sharing our most personal data, which is our genetic data. And they're collecting it by whatever means possible, apparently. They're both things that they find from people and things that we can purchase that are created in laboratories. So this is an official documentation that they are creating these sequences of infections, and they're getting out into the public, and it seems to be leaked a lot through people who are vaccinated, unfortunately for those who have been vaccinated. So an important update on Geert van der Bosch, we're almost at the end here of the segment, but just to say that he has announced that he is stepping back from the COVID arena because he's really disappointed in the fact that all these continuous breakthrough infections, which he's talked about previously, he's been in the UK column before, saying that basically the immune systems of people who are vaccinated are going to be high enough to trigger the predicted tsunami. And so we see here that the shot in every arm approach is causing this, and that vaccinated populations is creating this immune escape pandemic. So that means that this so-called long COVID, which has been the chronic, sort of infection, is now going to be the thing that's going to kind of come to an end for a lot of people, very unfortunately. But of course, NHS England is now already ramping up for its autumn vaccination campaign, guidance for all suppliers that was just published at the end of May. And this will be the COVID vaccination program from September of 2024 to March 2026. So that is what we have to look forward to, guys.
Good stuff.
Pretty incredible. A lot more to be said on all of that. And I'm sure Debbie Evans will have something to say on Friday.
Okay, Mark, let's come back to you then. Well, what's been going on with the Roman Catholic Church?
Well, a fairly unprecedented thing, a pretty shocking thing in conservative traditional Catholic circles. The defiant Archbishop Vigano, another blow to Pope Francis and the New World Order, according to this headline from the New American Magazine by an acquaintance of mine, William F. Jasper. And Jasper did a great job, but this was written prior to July 5. July 5, Vigano was officially excommunicated by the pontiff, Pope Francis. And it's the first time since 2006. The last time there was an excommunication of an archbishop was that year in 2006 of a Archbishop Malingo of Zambia. Anyway, as William F. Jasper wrote in the New American briefly, going back to June 20th, Archbishop Carlo Vigano, a former Vatican insider turned whistleblower, revealed that he had been summoned to Rome to respond to accusations and evidence concerning the crime of schism, of which he had been accused. He is charged with denying the legitimacy of Pope Francis, or Bergoglio, breaking union with him, and rejecting the Second Vatican Council, or Vatican II, which is pretty significant. The extrajudicial penal trial at the time was likely to result in the Archbishop's excommunication and dismissal from the priesthood, which it did. And at that time, Archbishop Vigano posted the official decree from the Holy See's Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, and went on to say that he regarded the accusations against him by the Pope as an honor, quote unquote. And Vigano himself went on to note, and I'll just hit the highlights, referring to Pope Francis, that the globalism that Pope Francis supports calls for ethnic substitution. Bergoglio, Vigano wanted to call the Pope by his actual name, promotes uncontrolled immigration, and calls for the integration of cultures and religions. And Vigano went on to say that the globalism that the Pope supports includes LGBTQ plus ideology. And Vigano noted that Bergoglio authorizes the blessing of same-sex couples and imposes on the faithful the acceptance of homosexualism. And Vigano also noted that the Pope's globalism imposes the green agenda. And he went on to make a lot of other comments. He said that the Pope goes beyond his role in matters that strictly pertain to science, but always and only in one direction, a direction that is diametrically opposed to what the Catholic Church has always taught. So what Vigano was basically saying, guys, is the real schism is being caused by Pope Francis himself. And so there's a lot of fallout from this. E. Michael Jones, the noted pro-Catholic author out of South Bend, Indiana, is really busy on his Twitter feed. And so it's a pretty significant thing. And looking at the ideology of it, though, I think a lot of people, UK column viewers, would come down on the side of Vigano, because Pope Francis truly has, and I'm speaking objectively, truly has really broken away from almost all traditional Catholicism altogether. So it really paints a clear picture of what the Pope is really about, in my view.
Yeah, brave man. And of course, he's breached a lot of the no-go areas for ADL in talking about, in even mentioning some of those issues. Now, what about our Deputy Prime Minister? Well, she's a bit of a snappy dresser, and apparently this is the key to new Labour. It's to wear the right clothes. I looked at this and I thought, here's Angela Rayner, apparently now one of the most powerful women in the country. I shouldn't underestimate her, apparently, but she looks like something out of a Christmas panto here, Mike. I thought of Aladdin and the lamp, and I think the genie was wearing something similar to this. But what interested me is under this picture, it said that Deputy Prime Minister Rayner has in the past said of herself, "I'm John Prescott in a skirt, me." So that didn't fill me with a lot of happiness, because I remember John Prescott all very well for what he got up to in Westminster. I decided a little video of the Daily Mail article was necessary here, because here's the infamous picture of him canoodling with his floozy, which of course he was doing whilst he was on duty in Westminster, but no problem for Mr. Two Jags at the time. And good to see that our latest Deputy Prime Minister is going to follow in his footsteps.
Okay.
So there we go.
Yes. Okay, Diane, let's come back to you now. And well, the question is about some of these conferences that are taking place that appear to be, sort of academic in nature.
Yeah, I just thought I would do a little bit of an introduction here to determining what we should be relying on when we see conferences coming out about controversial topics that will affect us. So there is a whole sort of system of industry out there of predatory or fake conferences. So scholarly conferences, which would be the type that scientists or academics would be attending, regardless of what you think of them, are there to bring scholars together. But you can see when you read the details about the conference, are there really scholars behind it? Is it universities behind it? Is it different, maybe hospitals, health organizations? What is going on? And with the fake conferences, they're normally run by a for-profit company. They're very, very expensive. They don't have any sort of guidelines in terms of do they have peer review? Do they have an editorial board? Do they know where they announce the location of the conference? I get a lot of spam in my email, which I call academic spam, which will say things like "Dearest eminent scholar, Mr. McAdie," which is wrong on a number of levels. So I just delete those. But if you're a new scholar and you see this, you might be flattered. I've had students who think, "Oh, look, they want me to come to this conference," when actually it's a fake conference. And so we have to be careful of these, and we have to look at the aim and the scope. So let's look at one example of a predatory or fake conference. This one is one that has been circulating on Twitter quite a bit, called the International Bird Flu Summit. So we're all worried about bird flu. Is it real? Is it fake? It's got a few speakers on it. But once we look a little bit about what's going on behind it, there's really not a whole lot of content. There's a couple of speakers, as I said, who are listed as speakers, but this is taking place in October. But we don't see anything else about it. We don't see a committee. We don't see any peer review process. We don't see any sort of oversight of what's going on. If we look into the brochure, which is a PDF, which is also on the website for the Bird Flu Summit, we see here, scary tactics, mass fatality management planning. Oh, I better go to that. Surveillance and data management. Just a list of very broad topics that don't have speakers next to them. There's no actual agenda. There's nothing affiliated with these. So, obviously that's going to be something that's going to get people's attention. And we better learn about mass fatality management planning. The conference website, which is from the conference brochure, from the PDF, if you click on that link, it goes to a company called Syllabus X. Syllabus X has a 404 error, page not found, when you click on the link that is meant to go to the conference. But that's a syllabus.com/bird flu summit or something like that. If you go to the birdflusummit.com website, which people have been talking about, that's when you see those previous slides. So I looked into Syllabus X a bit. I'd never heard of it as an academic of 25 years. Syllabus X's social media says, "Our podiums are about a campfire." Does that sound very academic or scholarly to you, or does it even make any sense? I don't know. It says they're based in Reston, Virginia. And so I decided to look at their website a little bit more for any other information. Their Twitter is right there. It's got some followers. Their pinned tweet is from 2023. If you go to the health section of their own website, their most recent conference is the Coronavirus Summit and Workshop 2020 from June 2020. And the cov-s.com email address doesn't exist. That is like a dead website again, a dead email address. And so then I also looked a little bit more into any further details. Where is this located? What is it doing? The phone number doesn't exist. I looked up the phone number. I also looked at the address. The address is actually a virtual address, 1900 Campus Commons Drive, Suite 100 in Reston, Virginia, is a virtual address where several companies seem to use it, and including it also says, well, this doesn't actually exist because it's a virtual office that you can say that you rent, and the University of Arizona has a phishing alert from it. So a real bird flu conference, unfortunately, is taking place in also around the same time period in October this year. That's at the University of Arkansas. It's in the Department of Poultry Science, and it's pushing the One Health agenda, which we've just talked about earlier. So we can see that this is a real conference. There are speakers, there are presentations, there are sponsors. It's at a university. And of course, unfortunately, World Economic Forum on one of its recent blog posts from a few days ago says that the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, is monitoring the U.S. bird flu spread. So of course, we can always get our WF updates and One Health. So unfortunately, I have to say these are real sources, and Syllabus X, birdflusummit.com is not. So please beware when you are circulating links or looking at sources.
Great. Diane, thank you very much for that. That brings us to the end of today's news. I'll just say that a lot of people have contacted UK Column saying how depressed they are as a result of the election result and Keir Starmer's policies. I say don't be depressed. You've got a wonderful opportunity to get active and tackle those new MPs before the whips get hold of them. And of course, you've also got the independents and even some of the reform candidates who are trying to do something to counter the system. So overall, in this timescale, tremendous opportunity to actually step up and challenge these people, educate them, and help them see that maybe they aren't connected with the right people. So let's leave it there on a positive note. Big thank you to the team for today's news. If you're a member of UK Column, stay posted. We'll be back for UK Column Extra shortly. Thank you for joining us wherever you are in the world. Bye-bye.